Hey everyone, I hope you guys had a good weekend and enjoyed assignment 1. Hopefully it wasn't too difficult and didn't really cause you any problems. Do let me know, I'm a little curious. Let me know whether you prefer long multiplication or lattice multiplication, just because um, I've talked to some people that didn't know what lattice multiplication was, but once they saw what it was, they actually preferred that over long multiplication. Now, for me, I grew up doing long multiplication. I've been doing it that way for so many years now that lattice multiplication is still a little unnatural to me. So my preference is still long multiplication, the first way that we did, but let me know if you do prefer the second way. And just for the record, on your test, you can use either. If I ask you to compute a product, that's a number times a number, you can do it either way, whatever's most comfortable for you. But today we're moving on from multiplication and we're moving on to division, specifically long division. So this is the most common sort of standard way that people use to divide one number by another number using pen and paper, or whiteboard and marker and so on. Basically, so what we're going to do is we're going to do some examples. I'm going to show you guys the process that you can use, and we'll talk about some different things that you can do with long division as they sort of come up. If there's time left at the end of this video, I'll touch on something that's a little bit extra, but if we don't have time for it in this video, then don't worry about it. We'll see if we can either touch on it later, or we might just not do it at all. So, let's start with something like, we just want to divide one number by another number. So let's do 265 divided by 5. Alright, now the thing, I don't know if you can see those dots. Now the thing is, the thing I was going to touch on, that's the little bit extra, is how you can know whether this number is divisible by that number. That is, when you divide it, is the answer going to be a whole number or is it going to be a decimal? That's what we want to know, right? We want to know, is this going to give us a whole number or is this going to give us a decimal? That's a helpful thing to know when you're working on a problem. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but hopefully you guys remember from years gone by that if this number that you're dividing if it ends in a 5 or a 0, then it is going to be divisible by 5. So this answer should be a whole number. And just in case you've forgotten, just a little bit of terminology, the number that you're dividing is called the dividend. That's D-I-V-I-D-E-N-D, in case you can't read my cursive. And then the number that you're dividing by is called the divisor. And the answer that you get at the end of it is called the quotient. So that's the answer to a division question. So just the way that the sum is the answer to an addition question, the difference is the answer to a subtraction question, and the product is the answer to a multiplication question, the quotient is the answer to a division question. And so, for example, in multiplication, the two numbers that you multiply together are called factors. In division, the first one is the dividend and the second one is the divisor. So I will, for now, I'll use the first number and the second number, or I'll point to them or whatever, but it is handy to know these terms so that if I say, if the dividend ends in a 24680, then if the divisor is 2, then, if I start using words like that, then you should understand which number is which. So write these down and in a way that you think you can remember it. But so what we want to do is we want to divide 265 by 5. And we're going to do that using long division. So the way that works, so I'm going to leave that there and we'll do the actual question over on the other side, is you're going to write the dividend. So this first number, this 265, you're just going to write that down. Leave a little bit of space, leave a gap. If you're writing this, on the right side of your page, leave a gap right there. We're going to put numbers on top of this a little bit later. So you're going to put a 265 and you're going to put this sort of thing around it. Some people would prefer to make the symbol look a little bit different. Some people prefer to write it like that. Either of them is fine as long as you know that you're doing division. I tend to do this first one a lot more, so I'm going to use that. I don't really like this second one very much, but that's just a matter of personal preference. Some people like to do a straight line down, something like that. But yeah, any of those work, whichever one you prefer. Go ahead and use that one, but I'm going to stick with this first one, unless I just, my hand slips for one question, I'll just leave it in one of the other ways. But, so you're going to write your dividend, this number here, you're going to write that over there. And then your divisor, this one, the 5 in this case, that's going to go over here on the left. Okay, so on sort of on the outside of that shape that we've drawn there, that line that we've drawn there. Right, so we've got our dividend here, 265, and then we've got our 5 here. So, with any long division question, you're going to ask yourself a series of questions, basically, over and over and over again. And you want to answer these questions in a numerical form. So you want to answer these questions with numbers. So the question you're asking yourself at the start is, how many times does the divisor, so 5, for this particular question, how many times does 5 go into 2? So you just look at the first digit here of your dividend, and you ask yourself, how many times does this number go into that number? So if you're asking how many times does 5 go into 2, a lot of people when they first see this, they answer with it doesn't or none, which is right, but I want to encourage that you answer this in a numerical format. So I want you to answer with 0 times, and that's going to be important in an example that we do a little bit later. So 5 goes into 2 0 times. Now what you can do, and I'll do it for this problem the first time, is if 5 goes into 2 0 times, you're going to write the 0 up top, like that. And your next step is multiplying this 5 by whatever digit you just wrote. So if there were a whole bunch of digits up top, you don't multiply the divisor 5 by all of them, you multiply it by the one you just wrote down. So 5 times 0 is 0. So I'm going to write that product, 5 times 0 is 0. And I'm going to write that 0 right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract. So I'm getting rid of that 5 times 0 that I just wrote there. And I'm going to subtract 2 minus 0, leaves me with 2. Right? So far so good. The next question you ask yourself is, well actually not yet. So the next thing you do is you bring down this 6 down here, 26. Alright, so we've turned this 2 into a 26 by pulling that 6 down from our dividend. Now we ask ourselves again, how many times does 5 go into 26? So now we're looking at this number down here. How many times does 5 go into 26? And you can count that out if you haven't figured it out already, but the answer is 5 times, so we'll put 5 up there, and you can always make sure you can check 5 times 5 equals 25. So we're going to get that 25 is about as close as you can hope for with getting to 26 here, you're trying to get close to this number without going over it, basically. So even if the next number up was closer, which in this case it's not, you still want to stay below that. So how many times does 5 go into 26? It goes in 5 times. So your next step is you multiply this 5 by the number you just wrote down. So that 5 up top, 5 times 5 is 25, we already know that. We put the 25 down here, and we subtract. 26 minus 25 will leave us with just 1. And our next step is to pull down this 5 over here. Now we ask ourselves again, how many times does 5 go into 15? So basically every time you pull down a digit, you have to ask yourself, how many times does 5 go into whatever number is closest to the bottom? So earlier we pulled down the 6, we said how many times does 5 go into 26? We did all that stuff. Now we've got a 15 because we've pulled down this 5, so we have to ask ourselves again, how many times does 5 go into 15? And the answer is 3 times. 5 multiplied by 3. Note, it's just the 3, not 53, just 5 times 3 equals 15. So we write that 15 down here, and we subtract, and we're left with 0. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. I suppose you guys can't really tell me if it doesn't. But that is basically the whole process. You basically keep doing that until you run out of digits to pull down. So now we've gotten this answer of 0 down here. You don't just do it until you get to 0. If this was another number, we would still be done the problem because we've run out of digits from our dividend to pull down. So if there was another number here, if there was like a 0 there, then we would have to pull that 0 down and do the whole process one last time. But we've run out of digits. So we stop here. And our quotient is this thing up top, 53 in this case. So we get our answer for 265 divided by 5 is equal to 53. Alright, so hopefully that's making sense. Let's do another example. And I'm going to do the next one or two kind of slowly, and then we'll pick up the pace a little bit. If we don't get through all the examples that I wanted to in this video, then in subsequent videos I'll just do more and more practice problems, but some of them might be a little bit faster. Alright, so let's do another one. And I might pick up the pace a little bit, but I'll try not to speed ahead too much. The next two problems, or at least the next problem for sure, follows the exact same process and gives us a similar result. The problem after that has sort of an extra level of complexity added to it, but it's not a very significant one. So the next problem is 927 divided by 3. And that's what we want to figure out, 927 divided by 3. So here our dividend is 927, so we're going to write that over here. And our divisor is 3, so that's going to go on the outside of this thing. And if you want, you can spread these digits out a little bit, just so you have a little bit more room to work with it. My arm's already kind of going to that half of the whiteboard, so I'm trying to keep it as close to me as possible. But otherwise, I would spread it out almost like if it was on a computer, almost putting a space between all of them, a space or two in between all of them. So just so that you have lots of room to work with it and it doesn't get all congested. So we start the same way we started before. We ask ourselves, how many times does this go into just that first digit there? So we ask ourselves, how many times does 3 go into 9? And the answer is, it goes into 9 3 times. Then we do 3 times 3, which gives us 9. So we put a 9 down here. That's from 3 times 3. And we're going to subtract. 9 minus 9 gives us 0. Right? So once we've got that answer, we're going to pull down the next digit. We pull down that 2. That's going to go right there. And now we ask ourselves, how many times does 3 go into 2? Now here, it's important that you answer it numerically. You could say 3 doesn't go into 2, which is right. You could say no times. You could say none. You could say it doesn't. All of those are correct, but what I want you to say is 0 times. That reinforces that you have to write a 0 up there. You can't just move on and pull down the 7 and start going with that. This 0 up here is important. And if you don't have that, you're going to get the wrong answer. So you have to answer this numerically. Answer it with a number. How many times does 3 go into 2? 0 times. 3 minus 0 is 0. We subtract. 2 minus 0 still leaves us with 2. Now we can pull down that 7 to there. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense. Now we've got this 7 down here, and we ask ourselves one more time, last time because this is our last digit, how many times does 3 go into 27? You can pause it if you want to work that out, but the answer here is 9 times, so we put a 9 up top. 3 times 9 is going to give us 27, so we write a 27 down here. We subtract. 27 minus 27 leaves us with 0. we've run out of digits again, so there's nothing left to bring down, so we don't have to ask ourselves any more questions, and our answer is just this thing up here. 309 is the quotient. Hopefully that's making sense. You can pause it here if you want to write that down. But the next problem is going to be slightly different. Maybe I'll solve this problem two ways, I guess. Yeah, we'll spend probably the rest of our time on this problem and then maybe one more after it. So this question is going to be 393 divided by 5. Alright, so we're going back to dividing by 5. I'm going to get rid of this one now. So we're doing 393 divided by 5. So we put our 393 here, we put this thing, and we put our 5. No problem. The first question you ask yourself, as always, how many times does 5 go into 3? You could say it doesn't, or you could answer it the better way, which is 0 times. Now you'll notice, if I say 0 times, I put a 0 up there, I do 5 times 0 is 0, I put a 0 here, I subtract, 3 minus 0 is 3, and I pull down the 9, and now I have a 39. Right? That's a lot of math to just go from asking ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 3, to how many times does 5 go into 39. Right? So we went, basically all we've done is if it doesn't go into the first number, 5 into 3, if that doesn't work, you just tack on the next number. If it still didn't work, so if this number was like 55 or something, then it still wouldn't go into 39, then you tack on the next number. And basically you keep doing that until you get a number that's not going to be 0 up here. So I'm going to solve it that second way this time. I apologize if you've already put all this subtraction stuff in your notes, then you can keep that there. But basically, you want to ask yourself now, so I'm going to get rid of that 0 as well. We're pretending we haven't even started yet. So how many times does 5 go into 3? 0 times. I don't have to do all that math. I can just instead ask myself, how many times does 5 go into 39? So I just tack on the next digit. This will give us an answer that's bigger than 0. So if you do the math, if you do the counting or whatever in your head, you get that 5 goes into 39 7 times. So I write a 7. Note that I write that 7 above the last digit that I'm considering. I actually think the way I've written it, it's a little too far over, but something like that might be a little bit better. So you don't want to write it above this 3. Whatever the last digit that you're asking yourself about, you're going to write it above that. So if I'm asking myself about the 39, 9 is the last digit that I'm interested in right now. So I'm going to write my answer above that. If I was doing like 55 into 393, then the last digit I would be considering is the 3. So I would put my answer over there. Okay, hopefully that's making sense. If that's not making sense, you can always do it the way with the 0, and then you'd have that 0 there, so the next logical spot would be to put it above the next digit. Alright, so you want to try and keep those columns lined up as best you can. So we've got that 5 goes into 39 7 times. Multiplying 5 by 7, we get 5 times 7 is 35. So we put a 35 over here, and we subtract. 39 minus 35 is going to leave us with just 4. And then my next step is to pull this 3 down. Right, so we pull this 3 down to here, and we turn the 4 into 43. Okay? So the next question we ask ourselves is, how many times does 5 go into 43? And the answer you'll get when you do the counting is you'll get that 5 goes into 43 8 times. So I'm going to put the 8 up there. That's a horrible 8. Let me redo that. 5 goes into 43 8 times. Hopefully that's a bit better. Alright, so we get 5 goes into 43 8 times, so we do the multiplication again. 5 times 8 is going to give us 40, so we put a 40 down here. and 43 minus 40 leaves us with just 3. Now we've run into a little bit of a problem. We've run out of digits to pull down, but this thing down here doesn't equal 0. So we're a little bit stuck. So there are actually two answers to this question. There are two ways you can solve this, and some professors and teachers will prefer it one way, some will prefer the other, some leave it up to you. One way, sort of the easy way, is you've got this 3 left over, you've run out of digits to bring down, so you can't ask yourself how many times does this go into that. So we call this our remainder, and we just write a capital R beside that number. And basically what this means is that 5 goes into 393 78 times, but we'll have 3 pieces left over that aren't accounted for. And so the way you would write your answer is 78 remainder 3. Instead of this capital R, some people like to write REM for remainder. Some people like to write the whole word remainder instead. But this capital R works just as well. The second way to do it, which we don't have to focus too much on right now because it sort of involves decimals. We'll come back to this a little bit later, but basically what you could do instead is you know that 393 is the same as 393.0, right? I haven't changed anything with this number, but that's also the same as 393.0000. I could put as many zeros as I want after this decimal point, and I haven't actually changed the number, right? So the last thing that you could do, you don't have to write this one down. If you're content with the remainder, then leave it at that. I'm just going to show you the other way to do this, is you change this 393, you extend it by adding a 0.0. Alright, so we haven't changed the number at all, and you have this 3 down here. Now you have a digit that you can pull down. Ignore the decimal point. It's there, but ignore it when you pull the 0 down. So you've got this 0 down here, and you ask yourself, how many times does 5 go into 30? And if you do the counting, you get that 5 goes into 30 6 times. You're going to write the 6 up above the 0, and here's where you're not going to forget about the decimal point entirely. You're just going to make this decimal point line up and put it up there. So we've got these 2 digits line up, we've got those 2 digits over there line up. You're just going to make these decimal points line up. So we do 5 times 6 equals 30, and we just tack on the decimal point directly above this other one. 5 times 6 is 30, we put a 30 down here, and we subtract, and we get a 0. And then we're really done, because we've got a 0 down here. If you didn't get a 0 down here, then you could tack on another 0 there and pull it down, and try and keep doing this process, and you would just be extending your answer into more and more decimal places. You don't really have to worry about that, but basically what we get out of doing it this way, out of tacking on that extra 0.0, what we get is we turn this answer into 78.6, which is a little bit more useful in the case of you're plugging this into a calculator and you're trying to figure out if your answer is right. And if you've got 78 remainder 3, it's kind of hard to tell when the final answer is 78.6, because a lot of people would expect that if you have a remainder of 3, a lot of people think that the answer should be 78.3. That's very wrong. So please don't make that mistake. Please don't make that assumption. This is the correct way to do it if you want to get a decimal point out of it. There might be another way to do it, but this is one correct way to get that decimal point if you really need it for your answer. So those are the 2 different ways that you can express your solution for this particular question. Yeah, so that's talking a little bit with long division involving decimals, but don't worry too much about that. I feel like I had something I wanted to add to this particular problem, but I have forgotten. So if it comes back to me, then I will bring it up in, I guess, the next video. But yeah, so that's how this type of problem will work. Let's do one more really quickly. just so you get one final look at it in this video. And then in the next video we'll do more with practice problems. We'll just take 2 minutes to zip through one more example. This one I'll speed up. And if you guys are finding that you're short on time, I'll write down the question and then you can try it yourselves and see if you get the right answer. So this one is 2,107. I don't know why I've written it so far over here, but it's 2,107 divided by 7. This is another way that you could write division. I've written it as a fraction, but this line here means that you're dividing. So 2,107 divided by 7. So we'll zip through this one. It's going to make this video a smidge longer than I would have liked, but that's alright. So we've got 2,107 divided by 7. So we start by asking ourselves, how many times does 7 go into 2? 0 times. So I can just move on and I can ask myself, how many times does 7 go into 21? I get that it goes into 21 3 times. 7 times 3 is 21. So I get minus 21 right here. And I subtract, that's going to leave me with 0. Then I bring down this 0. Here it's important again that you ask yourself a question and answer it with a number. How many times does 7 go into 0? 0 times. So I write a 0 up there. And now again it's a little bit optional to do this business. 7 times 0 is 0, 0 minus 0 is 0. Or I could have just pulled down the 7 directly beside that one. But the important thing that I'm trying to get across here is that you don't forget about this 0 right there. Okay? Now we pull down this 7 here, and we ask ourselves one more time, how many times does 7 go into 7? We get that 7 goes into 7 exactly once, so we get a 1 there. 7 times 1 is 7, so we do 7 minus 7, do that subtraction, you'll be left with a 0. And now we've run out of digits to pull down, and we've got a 0 down here. So that means that you've got no remainder, and your quotient is just going to be that whole thing up top. 301 would be your answer. So you get 2,107 divided by 7 is equal to 301. Absolute last thing, this I've remembered what I was going to say with the previous problem. So the previous problem was 393 divided by 5. Right? I'm going to get rid of this problem. I'll leave the solution up there for you. But so we got 393 divided by 5 is equal to, what do we say, 78 remainder 3. Right? Yes, that's what I have on my paper. So we got an answer of 78 remainder 3. If you want to check that your answer is right, so remember we've got 4 components to this answer now, right? We've got a dividend over here. We've got a divisor, we've got a quotient, which are the 3 parts we talked about before, and we've got a remainder. These are the 4 components to this answer, or to this problem as a whole. So we've got the dividend, the divisor, the quotient, and the remainder. If you want to check that your final answer is correct, what you want to do is you want to multiply the quotient by the divisor, and then you want to add the remainder to that, and that whole thing should equal your dividend. So your divisor multiplied by your quotient plus the remainder should give you the dividend. So let's just try that with this problem that we had. Let's do 78 times 5 and add on the 3 and see if it gives us that final answer, and then we'll end this video there and we'll do more practice in the next one. So our quotient was 78, so we want to do 78 times our divisor, which was 5, and then once we do that, once we do that, we want to add our remainder, which was 3, and see if that gives us our dividend of 393. So we do 78 times 5. You guys are all experts in multiplication now, so we do 5 times 8 is 40, carry the 4, 5 times 7 is 35, plus 4 is 39, so that's 390, and then we want to add our remainder to 390, so we do 390 plus 3, that's going to give us 393, which is our dividend. So that's how you can check your final answer if you have a remainder and you don't feel like doing the decimal way. So yeah, so this video's gone a little bit longer than I'd hoped. I'm trying to sort of match your class length minus 5 minutes. But yeah, hopefully you guys get through all of this. If you don't, I'm sure you'll pick it up in the next class. But yeah, the next video after this will just be some practice problems, and your next assignment will be coming out fairly soon. That's going to be multiplication and division, so you can get some practice, a little bit more practice with multiplication and some practice with long division. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you understood everything, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.